Hi, my name is Jerome Ortega. I've been with Hardlens Media for about 2 years now, and I'll be honest, I'm still learning a lot about politics. I have questions, and who better than my team to help me out answer them? This is Understanding Politics with Jerome Ortega. So as far as the voting process goes, Iowa, from my understanding, is the first to vote through a caucus, and this is something that I'm still trying to understand, the whole caucus process, the history of why Iowa is the first, and that's the best way to start this off, is why Iowa? Why is Iowa the first state to do this?
Right. Okay. So, we when we started covering this election cycle, myself, Daniel, the team here at Hardlens Media, we knew right off the bat that we're walking into a system that's heavily antiquated, and it's been tradition like that for a very long time, where Iowa's the first one. And let's say we fast forward past all the primaries, Republican primary, Democratic primary, you have the general election. You would think in a general election that the popular vote is the thing that's dominant, the one that determines who's the next president. When in reality, we have the Electoral College. So the Electoral College will dictate who will become our next president. It doesn't matter how many popular votes one person gets. If it doesn't match up with the Electoral College, those popular votes go out. Now, when we look at Iowa, it's a state that's first, and for so many presidential election cycles, even before I was born, but even before Daniel or the rest of the other team was born, even before you were born, you look at this system and just how antiquated it is. You see the fact that whoever wins Iowa, or at least the myth that's being told to us, whoever wins Iowa becomes the next president of the United States or goes on to the general election. And the case is that it's so odd how it's even run, where you have people in gymnasiums go to one side or another. You have people doing coin flips for delegates. You wouldn't expect this from a global superpower in regards to choosing someone who will be in the office, the most highest office in the entire world, and yet that's what we have in Iowa. It's the first state, but it's a backward state in regards to how you pick your next, your next nominee for going to the general election.
Okay, so when we're talking about Iowa and we're talking about the voting process, so when you say popular vote, you're just talking about how many people vote,
right? But the thing is, there's a problem with how people, or at least how a candidate gets delegates, because as we saw from Iowa, not only just a few weeks ago, but also from 2016. It's a complete disaster. They're not even tallying up people, especially when, let's say for Sanders, prime example.
Yeah.
They're not tallying up his delegates and his supporters up correctly. They're not tallying up his votes up correctly. And then you get the case of votes are missing. Or then like what we recently saw in Iowa, it's a clear tie when in fact there wasn't. And now they're showing that there's some real shady stuff happening with Pete Buttigieg and his connection to that shadow app that ruined everything over there. So it's... and Daniel brought this up in the show, and it's just, perhaps there's always been cases of Iowa just mismanaging their caucus, and perhaps this has just been the most high-profile example, but maybe there are so many other previous examples of them screwing up.
But why are they mismanaging? Like, what is the reason? Like, are they mismanaging because they're just incompetent, which is like not something I really want to say, but are they mismanaging because they have ulterior motives?
It could be both. Really, there is the fact that the DNC, we have to remember in 2016 that they did commit election fraud. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But then there's also the sad fact, and this is something that disturbs me the most, that it was probably just incompetence at this point. I mean, the DNC doesn't have the power that it did in 2016.
Right.
Of course, it doesn't mean everyone should be taking it easy and that we should turn a blind eye towards what they're doing. But they don't have the power that they had in 2016, and this is probably incompetence on their part and a lot of mismanagement. So that's even frightening, because then we got other states that are going to be caucuses, like most notably Nevada on February 22nd. Okay,
so let me just kind of try to understand. Really what I'm trying to do is just understand, because that's something that, I watch this team run their show, and even when I watch it, I still have a lot of questions. But so for this Iowa caucus, at the end of it, they said that Buttigieg had more delegates than Bernie, but Bernie had more votes cast, right?
That's right. He won the popular vote.
He had more of the popular vote, but he had less delegates. Is that Is that see? I'm trying to understand why. So why is Buttigieg? Why did he have more delegates, but Bernie won the popular vote?
Well, what we have to look at is that when these votes were tallying up, there's case examples of what happened in Iowa where some of Bernie Sanders' delegates went to Tom Steyer or Duvall, and that didn't make any sense at all. But because there was a real lack of accountability or anyone there really keeping an eye on things, Sanders did lose those delegates. But the thing is, at the end of the day, with so much mismanagement, it's almost irrelevant in regards to who got the higher delegate count in Iowa at this point, because we know that it was a disaster. We know that Pete Buttigieg made a premature a victory speech when in fact there was no victory, and the only people who actually had real strong data showing that they won Iowa was Bernie Sanders and his campaign and their own independent research, which is much more credible than what the DNC had.
So it's a very, very similar to the Electoral College, that he could win in some district an amount because it's delegate equivalent. So if you have, I don't know, 5 people in a room, maybe that counts as like 10 delegates, or 500 people in a room, that's like 10 delegates. And so maybe he wins 226, and then that carries over to a certain number of delegates, but it might round down or up in certain places. So even if he overall gets the most popular vote, the way that they're broken out and how they're distributed in each caucus site might be in such a way that you can win the caucus with fewer voters because of how they're distributed.
Okay, so this is really confusing for me, because so you're saying the delegates, right? However, how many delegates were there in Iowa? Do you guys know that number specifically?
There's 2 different kinds of delegates.
Okay, so
there's the actual delegates that matter, then there's the delegates that don't matter, but and the popular vote. But we determine who wins based on the delegates that don't matter. Okay, so that's already broken, right? I mean, pretty much what I'm understanding is it's broken. Why are we still doing a caucus and not? And so when you guys say the popular vote, that's just the vote, right? Yeah.
That's just whoever has the most votes wins. Why are we not just doing whoever has the most votes wins?
Because it's harder to take control of. It's harder.
So they're doing it because it's a rigged thing. Is that what you're saying? Like,
it's very, if you have a caucus system like that has previously been so uncounted, that this is the first time that they'd actually announced the popular vote. So back in Iowa, when that happened in 2016, we only knew the state delegate count, where there was actually no popular total even recorded. And that's done because if you're the Democratic Party, it's easy to move stuff around.
Yeah, so they did that undercover then, right? They didn't give that information out. Didn't people complain about that? Didn't they want to know what the popular vote was?
Right. Well, see, at this point right now, what we have to take into account is that Sanders and his team was prepared for this. Sanders and his team actually had their lawyers ready, and the thing is, yeah, they're going to be fighting for Iowa, but at this point, they have the victory. They have the popular vote, and they actually have the proof to show that that they have the evidence that they won Iowa. I mean, it's a fight important for them to have, but at this point, they got to keep moving their campaign forward to the next primary and to the next primary state, because at this point, I think a lot of people can agree after waiting 2 days plus just to get who won Iowa, Iowa's now irrelevant at this point. And and perhaps the Iowa caucuses have always been irrelevant at this point, because this has been the most high-profile one, like I mentioned earlier. But it's pointless to be involved in a previous fight now when there are more fights to win.
Sure.
And that's quite clear from previous polling data. We're seeing the Bernie Sanders surging in Nevada, South Carolina. Perhaps this will be Biden's last stand, because that firewall, we'll see if that even lasts. And then we go into Super Tuesday. And Bernie Sanders has done a phenomenal job, especially in 2016, and he's doing the same job too. The only difference is that more people are in this race right now, but all these candidates, save for Bernie Sanders, have a real questionable background and a real weak political infrastructure. So I'm not, at the end of the day, am I upset about Iowa? Sure. But it's also irrelevant to be upset about it, because it's over, and I know that Sanders had won. Corporate media screwed up, the DNC screwed up, the Iowa Democrats screwed up. The only person who didn't screw up was Bernie Sanders, his campaign, and his supporters.